Welcome back to the channel. Thank you guys for hanging with me on this Monday. And if you've taken some time out of your busy schedules to support my channel with comments and likes, I really do appreciate you for that. All right, so yesterday I did a video on a soft plastic jerk bait and how important it is this time of year to spend at least a little bit of your day searching with that bait. If you have fish that are up on flats or around cover, it is a really good bait just to get bites. Now, I also always have a topwater walking bait and a buzz bait tied on, and most of the time a jig. If there's some type of cover, I can fish a jig around. But it's very important that those baits typically are not the best search baits. Now, I do search with them a certain part of the day, but those baits, you have to be very careful on how you're reading the water with them. And I'm going to give you a couple different examples. So the first thing with the buzz bait, this is a really awesome bait. It's one of my favorite fall time baits because it catches big ones, it catches numbers, it does a really good job of imitating threadfin shad that are flickering around on the top of the water. And I think it also is such a good bait, the way it looks. It's very natural. It's a really good appearance to the fish, and they think it's real most of the time the way they bite it. And if you're not getting bit on it, I think two things are happening. You may be in a lake where the fish are tucked up in the cover. Maybe it's a grass lake and they're underneath the mats, or the fish are still out deep and they're just not relating to the shallow cover that you're fishing. Now, that's very important because you can totally change up your game plan, go back out deep, or move into the heavier, thicker cover where a buzzbait wouldn't really come through to find the bigger fish. Now, here's the deal in the fall time. The fishing is always going to be really tough. It's one of the worst times of year to go out and catch fish. So when you are throwing a buzzbait, the mistakes I've made on it in the past is you don't take advantage of every little clue. Like, you get a blow up, the fish is nowhere near your bait, misses your bait. You don't hook the fish. You don't really even see the fish other than the big explosion on top of the water. That should be enough of a clue that, hey, if I come back here tomorrow or I start fishing around the same area with a buzzbait, I could land that fish. Maybe my color of my trailer or my skirt isn't correct, or maybe I've got the wrong color blade. There's something that I'm doing that might not be correct. Maybe it is, but I've just ignored that. I don't know what that was. I don't know if that was a bass or what. The fishing's so tough, those little tiny clues when it comes to a topwater, you can't ignore them. I did that in a tournament and I didn't go back to that area, and then I heard from someone else, yeah, they're up there catching them on a buzzbait, black with a gold blade. And I think in practice I was throwing white with the silver. And it was like, I think if I just would have taken in that clue, that to me didn't seem like much of a clue at the time, but I didn't have a whole lot of clues to go on because that's how tough the lake was fishing. So it's very important with a buzzbait. Sometimes it's your only way you're going to trick big fish, and they turn away at the last second. You don't get them. You still got to pay attention to those things. And the same thing goes with the topwater walking bait. It's not a great searching tool on most lakes. Now, if there are lakes where it's big forage, the big bass on that lake eat big forage, and you're out there cranking and throwing all these other baits, and you're just catching little fish after little fish after little fish, it almost makes sense to roll the dice and just go big and just fish for fewer bites and bigger fish. And why that happens, I think a lot of times, is a lake may miss a few spawns. So there's just year classes of fish that don't exist. So the whole lake might just have 4 to 6 pounders and then 10 to 12 inchers on it. And those are the only fish on the whole lake. So if you're on a lake like that and you're not catching anything on all those other baits, well, what's the gamble? I mean, you should be putting all of your eggs in that big topwater walking basket. But if you have a bunch of, baits that are working, then the topwater walking bait isn't the end all be all and you need to go looking for that. But there are lakes where that does happen. Now, the last one would be the jig. I really love a jig. I've done very well this time of year on a jig, but I didn't necessarily go looking for those fish that I caught on a jig. I started with the Texas rig, or I started with a finesse jig, and I was getting so many bites on a Texas rig, creature bait, beaver, something like that, that I said, I'm going to go with the jig. Jig is going to catch quality, all those little fish that I'm either shaking off or setting the hook on. I can Totally get rid of those bites that I don't need anyways, that aren't really giving me clues and I don't really care about catching, and just go to quality bites, and then my hookup percentage is better. But I didn't start out with the jig because the jig doesn't give you a whole lot of clues. It's very conditional. You really need like a perfect day to catch them on the jig. I started with the Texas rig and I was getting so many bites that I was like, I'm moving up. Or use a finesse jig, you know, a jig that's much smaller, and start getting so many bites and catching a bunch of little fish, then go up to the bigger size jig. But I think that's very important in these techniques, especially this time of year when the fishing's really tough. Don't put the cart in front of the horse. You know, you need to figure out what you're doing with a fluke, with a Texas rig. And then once you realize that, hey, I'm around a bunch of fish, now I can spend a lot of my day targeting big ones, then break out that topwater walking bait, that 1/2 ounce, 3/4 ounce jig, or that buzz bait, and then stick with it. But that's very important this time of year. Try that, guys. Good luck to you, and I'll see you on the water.